Northern Iran, the 10th century. Strangers with heavy axes, round shields, and fair hair land on the shores of the Caspian Sea. Vikings. This is not a legend. This is the true story of a bloody battle in which the fierce warriors of Mazandaran taught the raiders of northern Iran an unforgettable lesson. How is this possible? What were Vikings, the fearsome warriors of Scandinavia, doing in the Caspian Sea, thousands of kilometers from the frozen waters of the north? The answer is in one word: wealth. This specific group of Vikings, known in Eastern Europe as Varangians or Rus, had a formidable trade empire along the rivers. Instead of the Atlantic, they navigated the great rivers of modern-day Russia. Their main highway was the Volga River. They traveled this long route in their long, shallow draft ships, bringing goods south like precious sable fur, honey, wax, and unfortunately, slaves. At the end of this trade route lay the Caspian Sea, and on its southern shores, a wealthy paradise rested: Tabaristan, or modern-day Mazandaran. 10th century Tabaristan was one of the richest regions in the Islamic world. Under the rule of the Persian Alid dynasty, this region was a center for silk production, valuable textiles, and booming agriculture. Cities like Sari and Amol were not just wealthy, but also centers of knowledge and culture. For the Rus Vikings, who until then had mostly dealt with the trade towns of the Volga, the legendary wealth of these cities was unimaginable. They had heard stories from merchants, and this wealth had dazzled the greedy eyes of the northern raiders. They had conducted small raids before, but now they were preparing for a major, all-out plunder. But this time, something was different. This time, they were unknowingly walking into a trap they would never forget. The year 913 AD. This date marks the beginning of one of the most brutal invasions of northern Iran. Historians like al-Masudi speak of a massive fleet. Some sources even mention 500 ships. While this number might be an exaggeration, it indicates the horrifying scale of this invasion. Thousands of Rus warriors, armed with heavy axes, long swords, and round shields, entered the southern waters of the Caspian. To the coastal people of Mazandaran, they looked like demons emerging from the sea. Invaders with a strange appearance and an unknown language, fighting with a cruelty that was rarely seen before. They stormed the coasts of Tabaristan. Scattered local resistance was quickly crushed. With indescribable violence, the Vikings began to plunder. Coastal towns and villages were looted and set on fire, one after another. They killed the men, took women and children captive, and gathered all the gold, silk, and valuable goods they could find. But they made one fatal mistake. They thought the job was done. They thought this region was defenseless. They were so arrogant that instead of a quick hit and run, they stayed in the area for months to gather and sort their loot. They set up camp on an island near the coast, likely near the Abaskun Peninsula, intoxicated with their easy victory, waiting to return north. They didn't know that, all this time, the Alid ruler of Tabaristan was preparing a deadly trap. In Europe, the Vikings were renowned for their invincibility. Their famous tactic was the shield wall. They would stand shoulder to shoulder, creating an impenetrable wall of wood and steel. This tactic, in the open fields of France and England, was the nightmare of nights. But this was Mazandaran. This was the home of Iran's most fearsome mountain warriors, the Daylamites. The Daylamites, ancestors of the modern people of Gilan and Mazandaran, had lived and fought in these mountains and dense forests for centuries. They were masters of combat in difficult terrain. Tough, fast, and ruthless men, known as the best infantry mercenaries throughout the Islamic world. Their main weapon wasn't heavy armor. Their weapon was a short, deadly javelin named Zupin, and efficient curved swords. When the Vikings, heavy with plunder, were returning towards their ships on the coast, the Daylamite army, under the command of the Alid ruler, blocked their path. The scene is terrifying to imagine. The Vikings, with their heavy armor and leather boots, are stuck in the mud and suffocating humidity of the dense Hyrcanian forests. A thick fog blinds their vision. The shield wall tactic, among the dense trees and uneven ground, was practically a joke. Suddenly, all hell breaks loose. The sound of Daylamite war cries rises from everywhere. The sound of thousands of Zupins whistling as they rain down from the branches. These javelins easily pierce the Vikings' wooden shields. The Vikings couldn't see the enemy. The smell of blood and sweat, mixed with the pungent odor of wet earth and jungle humidity. The Daylamite warriors, lightly armed and fast, leapt out from the trees like ghosts, striking deadly blows with their swords into the chaotic Viking ranks, and disappeared back into the fog before those heavy axes could come down. The confidence of the Daylamites, fighting in their home, was pitted against the fear, panic, and confusion of the northern invaders. The heavy armor had now, instead of protection, turned into metal coffins. This was no longer a battle. It was a slaughterhouse. The battle turned into an absolute catastrophe for the Vikings. They were broken. This wasn't an orderly retreat. It was considered a desperate flight for survival. They abandoned the precious loot they had spent months gathering, right there in the mud, just to save their own lives and get to the ships. Only a very small number, wounded, humiliated, and empty-handed, managed to get themselves to the ships and escape the carnage. They fled in terror towards the north of the Caspian Sea. The surviving Vikings thought the worst part was over. They rowed their ships north, exhausted, wounded, humiliated, and with empty hands. But fate was not yet finished with them. In the delta of the Volga River, where the river pours into the Caspian Sea, another enemy lay in wait. The Khazars. Yes, the Khazars, the powerful empire that dominated the Volga trade route. These were the same ones who, on the way down, had granted the Rus passage in exchange for a share of the spoils. But now, news of the savage plunder of Muslim-majority lands in the south had reached their ears. The great historians Ibn Miskawayh and al-Masudi recorded the details of this horrific end. The Khazars, enraged by this savagery and perhaps encouraged by the Persian rulers, this time blocked the path of the survivors. A fierce battle ensued. But these were no longer those arrogant Viking warriors. These were exhausted, defeated remnants. The Khazars showed them no mercy and massacred them. Al-Masudi writes that of that huge army that had arrogantly attacked Tabaristan, almost no one survived to tell the story of their defeat. This catastrophe was so great that for the next 30 years, until the year 943 AD, no Viking dared to approach the southern shores of the Caspian Sea. The Battle of 913 AD in Mazandaran was not just a military victory, it was the story of a confrontation between the brute force of the Vikings and the strategic intelligence and local knowledge of the Iranians. The Vikings were masters of battle in the open plains, but the Daylamites were masters of the forest and the mountains. They showed the invaders that every territory has its own rules of engagement. The Daylamite warriors showed them that these northern forests were their home, and anyone who coveted this home would face a price they would never forget. The Vikings may have been terrifying on the shores of England and France, striking fear into the hearts of kings, but on the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, they met opponents who knew the lesson of resistance and warfare better than anyone else. This was a lesson that came at the cost of the annihilation of an entire army. If you enjoyed watching this hidden piece of Iranian history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Happy Voyager channel for more amazing stories from the past. Now, it's your turn. Do you know of another similar story of guerrilla battles in Iranian history? Write your thoughts for us in the comments.